A crown means little if you refuse to lift it for others. Long before the name Leia Organa echoed through battlefields and council chambers, she was a girl beneath the golden skies of Alderaan. Alderaan was a world of peace. A jewel among the core worlds, it stood for diplomacy, learning, and beauty. Towering spires and lush valleys marked its landscape. And within the palace at its heart, a child was raised to rule, not through dominance but through compassion. Leia was adopted by Bail Organa and Queen Breha, leaders of Alderaan and stalwart voices in the Galactic Senate. Her birth name, hidden from history, tied her to a darker legacy. Leia Skywalker, daughter of Padme Amidala and Anakin Skywalker, but the Organas never treated her as anything less than their own. She was raised with the expectations of nobility and the weight of the world's ideals. Tutors taught her politics and languages. Guards trained her in self-defense. Breha taught her to hold her head high. Bail taught her to listen before speaking. And even as a child, Leia was restless. She questioned everything. Why couldn't she leave the palace grounds on her own? Why did the Senate debate endlessly instead of acting? Why did some planets have so much and others nothing? She learned the rules of decorum, and then she tested them. At age 13, she snuck aboard a diplomatic transport to deliver aid supplies herself to struggling Outer Rim colonies. At 14, she spoke out publicly against the Emperor's expansionist policies, drawing unwanted attention from the ISB. At 15, she was already writing coded communiques for her father, quietly assisting the rebel cells forming under his influence. She was a princess, yes, but also a spy in training. Alderaan's halls became more than polished corridors. They became a training ground for rebellion. Her father taught her to read reports for subtext, to watch who listened too closely, to trust the people, not always the politicians. But there was always a tension. Leia grew up between peace and fire, taught to cherish harmony, yet prepare for war. She wanted justice, yet hated the cost. Her parents hoped she'd become a leader in the Senate, shaping the galaxy through diplomacy. Leia dreamed of something more active, more direct. When she was 16, she underwent the Day of Demand, a rite of passage declaring her intent to claim her royal title. Before the people of Alderaan, she promised to uphold justice, defend the helpless, and honor her world. But even then, her eyes were turning outward, to the galaxy beyond. She saw the Empire's cruelty spreading, heard whispers of uprisings crushed in the Outer Rim. She asked her father what they were doing to stop it, and he showed her. Leia's final test of loyalty to Alderaan was not a court ritual. It was her first true mission. Sent under the guise of diplomatic aid, she traveled to Wobani, a world ravaged by Imperial labor camps. What she saw, the starvation, the silence, the fear, burned into her memory, and in that moment her path became clear. Leia would not simply inherit Alderaan's crown. She would wield its influence like a torch. And in the quiet night after her return, Bail stood beside her, looking out over the Alderaanian skyline. "You'll see terrible things, Leia," he said, "and you'll be asked to do worse. But you must remember, our cause is not destruction. It is restoration." She nodded. She was no longer just a princess. She was a soldier in spirit, a rebel before the galaxy knew her name, and the fight was only beginning. Some fires begin with whispers, not roars, but they still burn. Leia Organa was 17 when the rebellion ceased to be a secret. For years, she had operated behind the polished veil of Alderaanian nobility, attending Senate sessions, advocating for humanitarian corridors, watching the Empire grow bolder, more brutal, cloaked in the legality of Imperial decree. But beneath it all, she moved in silence, running encrypted messages for her father, meeting rebel operatives, learning how to live in the shadows of a regime that demanded obedience. The spark was there. It needed only fuel. Leia's first real mission began with information. Imperial intelligence had uncovered pieces of a devastating new project, a moon-sized weapon, rumored to be capable of annihilating entire planets. The rebellion knew it by a name that would haunt the galaxy: the Death Star. A secret transmission from Cassian Andor and Jyn Erso confirmed the threat. The Death Star was real, and its construction was nearing completion. The Alliance needed the weapon's technical schematics to find a weakness. Bail Organa, now deeply entangled in rebel leadership, turned to his most trusted asset: his daughter. Leia's mission was clear: travel to Toprawa, receive the stolen plans from rebel spies, and deliver them to the rebellion's central command on Yavin 4. But things, as they often do in the shadow of tyranny, did not go as planned. Before Leia could reach Yavin, her ship, the Tantive was intercepted. An Imperial Star Destroyer under command of Darth Vader captured the vessel. She was taken prisoner. The transmission logs scrubbed, the plans hidden within the memory banks of an astromech droid, R2-D2. Leia did not break. Even as Vader interrogated her, even as Governor Tarkin threatened her world, even as the shadow of her lineage loomed silently beside her, unspoken, unknown, she lied, she resisted, she endured, and she paid a price. Alderaan was destroyed, her home, her mother, her friends. 1,000 years of peace wiped away by a single demonstration of Imperial power. Leia did not scream. She did not weep in chains. She promised vengeance in quiet resolve. While R2 and C-3PO escaped with the plans to Tatooine, where fate would guide them to a boy with the Force in his blood, Leia remained aboard the Death Star, tortured and isolated, waiting for execution. But destiny intervened. Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Chewbacca, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, a ragtag rescue sparked by R2's mission, freed her from her cell block. She quickly took charge, blasting a path through stormtroopers and navigating trash compactors with far more tactical sense than her would-be saviors. Leia was not a damsel, she was a leader. When they escaped and returned to Yavin, Leia immediately turned her focus to the battle ahead. The plans she'd risked everything for were analyzed, a weakness in the Death Star was found, a mission was mounted, and then they won. Luke fired the shot. The Death Star fell, but it was Leia who had delivered the opportunity. Her mission, her sacrifice, had given the rebellion its first true victory, but the cost was immense. She had no home to return to, no mother's arms, no quiet Alderaanian fields, only war. Still, she stood. The rebellion had gained a hero in Luke Skywalker, a fighter in Han Solo, but in Leia Organa they had a commander, a strategist forged by loss and strengthened by fire. From that moment forward, she ceased to be just a princess. She became a rebel leader. Hope is not a word. It is a blade, sharpened in silence, and drawn when all else is lost. After the destruction of the first Death Star, Leia Organa stood at the heart of something far greater than a single battle. The rebellion had scored its first major victory, but it had also gained a target on its back. Leia wasted no time. While the galaxy saw Luke Skywalker as a hero, Leia saw the larger picture. The Empire would respond, and the rebellion could not afford to lose momentum. She coordinated the withdrawal from Yavin 4, working with General Dodonna and Admiral Akbar to establish new hidden bases. She led diplomatic missions to systems teetering between neutrality and fear. Her sharp wit, fluent diplomacy, and unwavering defiance made her a figurehead for the cause. But behind her composure, grief simmered. Alderaan was gone. She often dreamed of it, quiet forests, music halls, her mother's voice, and woke with the weight of loss pressing against her chest. But she had no time to mourn, because Leia understood something clearly. If she let grief consume her, the Empire would win again. Instead, she led. On Hoth, Leia was instrumental in building Echo Base. She helped engineer the installation's defensive systems, worked with engineers and scouts, and inspired morale among soldiers, freezing in the snow. She knew their names. She walked among the ranks, not above them. When the Empire discovered their location and launched a ground assault led by Darth Vader himself, Leia organized the evacuation. She stayed until the last transport left, coordinating retreat, directing personnel, and personally ensuring the safety of the wounded. Only then did she escape aboard the Millennium Falcon, with Han, Chewbacca, and C-3PO. What followed was a period of chaos and awakening. Leia and Han clashed constantly, sparring with words that barely masked a growing tension. She had spent her life burying feelings beneath duty, but Han broke through that wall with every reckless, stubborn, loyal act. In the quiet moments aboard the Falcon, Leia allowed herself something rare. Affection, not weakness, but trust, a connection that did not erase her strength, but deepened it. But peace was not for her. Not yet. They were betrayed on Bespin, captured by Vader. Han was frozen in carbonite, and in the halls of Cloud City, Leia came face to face with the truth that changed everything. Luke was her brother. Vader was her father. She didn't learn this from Luke immediately, but the Force whispered it to her, slowly, deeply, like a truth she had always known. And it shook her, not because she feared Vader's blood, but because she had seen what it could do. She buried the fear, focused on the mission. She led the rescue to save Han from Jabba the Hutt, disguising herself as a bounty hunter, negotiating in the shadows, and finally killing Jabba herself, with her own hands, using the very chains he tried to enslave her with. Leia Organa never waited to be saved. She saved herself. And then, the rebellion made its final move. On Endor, Leia led the ground team to disable the shield generator protecting the new Death Star. She fought in the forests, side by side with Han and the Ewoks, and faced her brother, now fully aware of who they were. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Luke told her the truth about their father, about the Force, about his plan to confront Vader. She listened in silence, and for once, she was afraid. But she let him go. Because in Leia, courage did not mean the absence of fear. It meant moving forward despite it. And when the second Death Star exploded, when Vader and the Emperor were gone, Leia was there to hold Luke. She didn't speak. She didn't ask what happened. She simply knew. The war was over. But her fight was not. You don't lead. You don't lead because you wear a title. You lead because others follow you through the fire. When the second Death Star fell, the galaxy celebrated. But Leia Organa did not. She stood among the jubilant crowds on Endor, feeling a grief deeper than any ceremony could cover. The Empire was broken, yes, but not gone. The systems that had fueled its rise still smoldered. The fight for freedom was only shifting into a new form. Leia did not fade into peace. She stepped forward. She became one of the principal architects of the New Republic, a fledgling democracy forged from the remnants of rebellion. In the chaotic years after the war, she balanced diplomacy with vigilance. There were worlds still loyal to imperial order, entire sectors still caught between chaos and power vacuums. And even as the Senate returned to Coruscant, Leia's heart remained with the soldiers. Her title changed, from princess to senator, then general, but her purpose did not. She rebuilt the Republic's diplomatic corps. She advocated for former Outer Rim territories long neglected by the core worlds. She personally toured war-torn planets to assist in reconstruction. Wherever leaders hesitated, Leia acted, and all the while, she carried a private burden. Han Solo had returned to her side after the war. Their bond, once forged through friction, had deepened into love. They married, not in ceremony, but in commitment. And soon Leia gave birth to their son, Ben Solo. He was strong in the Force from the beginning. Luke, now searching for ancient Jedi wisdom, agreed to train him when he came of age. Leia believed the Jedi Order could be reborn, not as warriors, but as guardians of balance. But in quiet moments, Leia worried. She felt the shadow of Anakin Skywalker stirring in her son, not as fate, but as possibility. She never hid the truth from Ben. She believed honesty was the path to peace. But truth, especially about legacies, is heavy in a child's hands, and Ben carried it alone. Still, Leia continued to lead. She worked to demilitarize the New Republic, fearing that any large standing army would simply invite a new tyranny. But not all agreed. Former Imperials regrouped in the unknown regions. Whispers of a rising force, the First Order, began to spread. Leia sounded the alarm. The Senate dismissed her, so she left. Disillusioned with politics, but never with purpose, Leia formed an independent force, the Resistance. It wasn't official, it wasn't sanctioned, but it was necessary. Old rebels returned to her call. New allies joined. Pilots, strategists, freedom fighters, those who knew the war wasn't truly over. And they followed her not because she commanded them, but because she never asked anything she wouldn't give herself. She became General Organa, a symbol of vigilance in an age of complacency. As the First Order grew in power and aggression, Leia's resistance became the last real barrier between tyranny and freedom. And when the New Republic's capital was destroyed by Starkiller Base, the galaxy finally understood what she had known all along. Peace is not the absence of war. Peace is something you fight to protect. In those years, Leia did not sleep much. She carried the grief of a son lost to darkness, the ache of a brother who had vanished into legend, and the hope that anyone might still rise to carry the light forward. But until then, she would stand. Because Leia Organa did not need the Force to be powerful. She led with conviction, clarity, and courage. and as the resistance faced annihilation, she became their light in the dark. After the Battle of Endor, when the fire of rebellion cooled and the stars seemed quieter, Leia Organa and Han Solo tried something neither of them truly expected. They built a life together. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't peaceful. Leia was a leader, pulled into rebuilding a galaxy frayed by tyranny. Han was a pilot, a rogue forever drawn to movement, to freedom. And yet, they loved each other deeply. Not for what they were supposed to be, but for who they were. Through shared scars, stolen moments, and endless arguments that always ended in laughter or silence. They chose each other. In the early days of the New Republic, they lived in relative quiet. Leia returned to diplomacy. Han tried his hand at command, even teaching young pilots. And then they had a son. Ben Solo. He was born of fire and legacy, his lineage a storm of light and shadow. Grandson of Anakin Skywalker, nephew of Luke Skywalker, heir to Organa and Solo. The Force in him ran deep, raw, unstable. Leia saw his potential the moment she held him. She also saw the danger. Ben was loved. That much is true. Leia and Han gave him everything they could: attention, protection, freedom. But the galaxy loved him less simply. Some whispered about his bloodline, about Vader, about the darkness that might awaken in him. Leia shielded him as best she could. But some truths can't be held back forever. She chose honesty. When Ben was old enough, she told him who his grandfather truly was. That Darth Vader, the enforcer of oppression, was once Anakin Skywalker. Her father. His. She hoped it would free him. Instead, it shook him. Leia could see it. The conflict in his eyes. The confusion. The fear that his destiny was written in blood, that he might fall as Anakin once did. She turned to Luke. Her brother had already begun rebuilding the Jedi. Leia, herself strong in the Force, had trained briefly with him, but chose to step away, haunted by visions of her son's death. But Luke could help Ben. He could teach him, guide him, protect him, or so they all hoped. Ben's departure to Luke's temple was a quiet fracture in the family. Leia buried herself in duty, leading, negotiating, fighting. Han drifted, returning to old habits, old circuits, old scars. They remained in contact, but the distance between them was real. Neither blamed the other. They simply didn't know how to grieve what hadn't yet been lost. And then, they did lose him. Ben Solo fell. Drawn by Snoke, twisted by fear, anger, and manipulation, Ben became something else. He destroyed Luke's temple, took the name Kylo Ren. He disappeared into the stars and reemerged as the right hand of the First Order. Leia felt it like a blade. The son she carried, the boy she raised, the child she loved, gone. She did not scream. She did not crumble, but a part of her never healed. Han left entirely, not out of anger, but pain. He returned to the Falcon, to smuggling, to the man he once was. He couldn't face what had become of their son. Leia stayed, with the resistance, with the burden, because someone had to. Years later, they would meet again, briefly, in the shadow of Starkiller Base, the galaxy on fire once more. Han's eyes held regret, Leia's held sorrow, but both still held love. "If you see our son," she said, "bring him home." Han never returned, killed by Kylo Ren's own hand. Ben Solo's last bridge to his parents shattered. Leia didn't mourn publicly. She sat alone, silently. The Force around her, aching. And yet, she still hoped that Ben could come back, that he wanted to, that the light inside him, however faint, still existed. Because Leia Organa never believed people were beyond redemption. Not her father, not her son. Not anyone. A name is not destiny. A name is only the shadow you choose to cast behind you. Leia Organa had spent her life defining herself by what she chose to be. A leader, a soldier, a voice for the voiceless. But there was one truth she had not chosen. A truth revealed not by blood, but by the Force. She was Leia Skywalker, daughter of Anakin Skywalker, once a Jedi Knight, now remembered as Darth Vader. The knowledge came to her gradually, first through Luke, then through her own feelings as she touched the Force and saw pieces of her origin. Not images, but emotions, echoes. A childhood she had never known, a mother's voice she had never heard. For years she kept it buried. She feared what others would say, what the galaxy would think if it learned that one of the leaders of the New Republic shared blood with the very tyrant who had enslaved it. The truth would not only hurt her, it would fracture the fragile peace they were building. So she wore her adopted name with pride. Organa, because to her, Bail and Breha were her true parents, not by blood, but by love. Still, the past was not silent. It whispered in visions, in dreams, in Luke's voice when he urged her to begin Jedi training. At first, Leia resisted. She believed her place was in diplomacy, in governance, not among mystics with blades and robes. But as the Force continued to awaken in her, she realized she had no choice but to understand it. Not for power, but for peace. She trained with Luke on remote worlds, far from politics and press. The Force came to her differently than it had to her brother, less like a wave, more like a breath. Steady, subtle, natural. She built her own lightsaber, gold and silver, elegant and precise. She studied meditation, precognition, even Force healing. She was strong, stronger perhaps than she ever allowed herself to believe. And yet she stopped. In a moment of stillness, Leia saw a vision, a future where her path as a Jedi ended in sorrow, the death of her son. She couldn't see how or when, only that the power she had inherited might consume, not save. So she made a mother's choice. She turned away from the saber, buried her training, not out of fear of who she was, but out of love for who her son might become. Luke respected her decision. He knew the burden she carried was greater than any single role, and so her saber was hidden, set aside, waiting. Years later, the truth of her parentage would come back, not from within, but from without. In the Senate, as the First Order's rise became undeniable, political rivals leaked her bloodline. Leia Organa, beloved general and hero, was revealed to be the daughter of Darth Vader. The news sent shockwaves through the Republic. Allies turned cold. Public trust wavered. To many, it didn't matter what she had done, only what she came from. Leia did not defend herself. She didn't deny it, didn't run from it. She stood and said, "I am Leia Organa. I have always fought for peace. That has never changed and never will." Her words echoed louder than the scandal, because Leia had always been more than her name, more than Vader's daughter, more than a Jedi or a general. She was a symbol of endurance, of resistance, of truth. And while the past haunted her, it never defined her. Instead, it forged her. The New Republic believed the war was over. The Senate was restored, Imperial remnants scattered, Starfleet forces were downsized, and most citizens rejoiced in peace, finally, after decades of fear. But Leia Organa was never content to trust the surface. She saw the cracks early. She listened when no one else would. Rumors of an organized, militarized faction growing in the unknown regions reached her long before anyone dared call it a threat. Whispers of secret shipyards, vanishing scientists, distant systems falling silent without warning. And behind it all, a name, the First Order. Leia brought her concerns to the New Republic's leadership. They dismissed her. Some accused her of paranoia, others of using fear to rebuild the military. And when her bloodline, daughter of Darth Vader, was exposed, trust shattered. So she left, not defeated, not exiled, determined. She formed a new organization, not sanctioned by the Republic, but tolerated, not large, not glamorous, but focused. Old friends returned. Admiral Akbar, Nien Nunb C-3PO. Younger allies stepped forward, Poe Dameron, Snap Wexley, Paige and Rose Tico. Leia built her base on the fringe worlds. Kar, Takodana, hidden systems beyond the core's gaze. They trained in silence, gathered intelligence, tracked First Order movements while senators bickered, the resistance prepared. Leia wasn't just a leader. She was hope personified. She kept the morale high, not with speeches, but presence. She walked among her people. She remembered names. She reviewed battle plans, treated droids as equals, and never, never stood above anyone. Her eyes, though tired, still saw clearly. Her voice, though weathered, still commanded without fear. She missed Han. She missed Luke. She missed her son. But she carried on. When the First Order unveiled Starkiller Base, a weapon capable of destroying entire star systems, Leia didn't flinch. She coordinated the Resistance's attack with ruthless precision. And when the Hosnian system, the New Republic's capital, was obliterated in a single blinding instant, she did not mourn publicly. She simply turned to her generals and said, "Then we fight. We're all that's left." Leia knew the cost of war. She had paid it before. This time she paid it again, in soldiers, in planets, in silence. But still, the Resistance endured. She sent Poe Dameron to Jakku to retrieve a map, a piece of the lost puzzle that could lead to her brother. Luke Skywalker, who had vanished into legend and myth, was her last great hope. She knew only he could help her son, and only he could help the galaxy remember the light. Poe found the map, but with it, came chaos. Finn, a former stormtrooper, defected. Rey, a scavenger from nowhere, touched the Force. Han returned. Kylo Ren rose, and Leia felt it all. Every connection, every loss, every thread fraying in her hands. She sent Han to bring Ben home. He never came back. The Resistance, fewer than 1,000 strong, faced an army of tens of thousands. And Leia, she did not retreat. She did not collapse. She stood at the center of the storm. General Organa, last hope of the Resistance, last Skywalker still leading with heart and resolve. And even as the darkness grew, Leia was still the light that kept others from falling. Even in the dark, I will always be your light. Leia Organa loved her son before he had a name. She loved him before he took his first breath, before his Force sensitivity stirred in the womb, before she ever imagined what burdens his bloodline might carry. And when he was born, Ben Solo, her and Han's only child, she believed that love would be enough. Love. But love is not a shield, and legacy does not sleep quietly. Ben was powerful, too powerful. From the beginning, he was sensitive not just to the light, but also to shadow. Leia hoped Luke could help him, her brother, the last Jedi, the one who had saved their father's soul. So Ben went to train, and Leia remained behind, a mother watching her son walk into the unknown. She felt the change long before the galaxy saw it. The distance, the silence, the cold flicker in the Force where once there had been warmth. She knew the day Ben Solo became Kylo Ren. And still, she never gave up hope. Leia refused to speak of him as lost. To others in the Resistance, Kylo Ren was a monster, a butcher, the masked hand of the First Order. But to Leia, he was still her son. She mourned him silently, not because he had died, but because she believed he still lived, somewhere deep inside. When Han returned, she asked him for the impossible. If you see our son, bring him home. Han knew what that meant. He also knew she was asking not as a general, but as a mother. Leia remained at her post after Han's death, even as it broke her heart. Even as the Resistance was chased from world to world, reduced to whispers and embers, she held on. Because Leia understood something that many Jedi had forgotten. Redemption is not earned. It is offered. She didn't believe in Ben's goodness because she sensed it. She believed because she had nurtured it, because she knew it, because she was his mother. When Rey arrived, a Force-sensitive girl carrying the weight of the future, Leia saw a new hope, but also a reflection of Ben. The anger, the confusion, the fear of becoming something dark. She took Rey under her guidance, not just as a student of the Force, but as a daughter in spirit. Not to replace Ben, but to remind her what love without condition looked like. Leia gave Rey everything she had left, and when the time came, she gave more. At the edge of the Resistance's survival, during the final assault on Exegol, Leia knew what she had to do. She reached across the stars through the Force, not with anger, not with a plea, but with a whisper. She called her son's name. Ben. In that moment, when Rey and Kylo clashed, Ben froze. The storm paused, the mask broke, and Leia slipped away. Her last breath was spent not in command, not in battle, but in hope. Leia died as she lived, reaching out, believing, loving fiercely, and her voice stayed with Ben even after her body faded. It lingered through the Force, gently guiding him toward what he could become. Not Kylo Ren, not Vader's heir, but Ben Solo, the boy she had loved from the beginning. Her death was not a defeat. It was her final victory. A mother's love, echoing across stars, would be the light that led her son home. In the final days of the Resistance, Leia Organa was a woman stretched between loss and duty. Her son was gone. Her brother was gone. Her husband, gone. And the Resistance, shattered. What had begun as a hopeful rebellion now hung by threads. Dozens of fighters scattered through space, hiding, starving, praying. The First Order had destroyed entire systems. The New Republic was ashes. And worse still, a greater darkness had returned. Palpatine. Somehow the old Emperor had survived, re-emerging from the shadows with a fleet of unimaginable size. The Final Order threatened to crush the galaxy in a single sweep. Leia felt it all. The unraveling of hope, the weight of destiny falling once again on her shoulders. But she did not break. On Ajan Kloss, Leia worked with what remained of the Resistance to gather allies, to plan one final strike. She barely slept. Her body, long wearied by years of war and heartbreak, had begun to fail her. But her mind remained sharp, her will unyielding. Rey trained at her side. Leia was no longer just a general, she was a mentor, a final voice of light. She taught not through combat, but with wisdom. She reminded Rey of patience, of balance, of the choice to stay in the light, and she did so as her own light flickered. When Leia learned of Ben's final descent, her pain was immeasurable, but still she did not speak ill of him, not once. To her, he remained her son, and even at the end, she believed he could return. Leia's staff began to notice something in those last hours. She moved less, spoke softly, often stood alone, staring at the sky as if searching for a familiar presence. Perhaps she was reaching for Luke, or for the Force itself, or simply for peace. And then, the moment came. Rey was on Kef Bir, battling Ben Solo in the ruins of the second Death Star. Leia knew, she felt it. With the last of her strength, she reached across the galaxy through the Force. A simple, powerful act, not to fight, but to call. Ben, a mother's voice, a final plea. In that instant, Leia gave everything. Her life, her presence, her very essence. Her body faded into the Force. Her final act, not of battle, but of compassion. It was enough. Ben Solo dropped his blade. The light returned to his eyes. Leia's mission, her hope, had not been in vain. The galaxy mourned her quietly. On a John Kloss, her body was veiled in cloth, laid upon stone beneath a canopy of leaves. There were no parades, no grand ceremonies, only those who knew her best. The warriors, the pilots, the friends who had followed her for decades. Rey was among them, silent, shattered, but also changed. Leia's saber, long hidden, was passed to Rey. Her voice would linger in the Force, her light eternal. Poe Dameron wept. He wasn't ready to lead. Leia had been more than a general to him. She had been a guide, a moral compass. But in her absence, he found courage, because she had believed in him. All of them were stronger because of her. Leia Organa died not on a battlefield, not in fire or fury. She died the way she lived, protecting others, leading with grace, believing in the impossible. And through those who carried her memory, Rey, Poe, Finn, and the scattered survivors of a battered resistance, the spark of rebellion blazed again, not just to defeat darkness, but to honor the woman who never let the light go out. She wasn't just royalty, she was revolution. Leia Organa was born into nobility, raised into rebellion, and remembered as legend. Her legacy is not etched in monuments or carved into statues, though many exist. Her true legacy lives in people, in choices, in change. Leia's life wove through the most pivotal events in galactic history. She was there when the Senate fell and when the Empire rose. She fought in the first spark of rebellion and later led the charge against its resurgence in the form of the First Order. But what defined her was not her presence in history. It was how she shaped it. She never sought power for herself. She didn't chase titles, though she held many: princess, senator, general, Jedi. Instead, she fought to give others the power to rise. Leia taught the galaxy that leadership did not come from bloodlines or destiny, but from conviction. She forged alliances across species and cultures. She showed that courage could take the form of a blaster in the hand or a raised voice in a Senate chamber. She believed in diplomacy, but never shied from a fight when justice was at stake. Her impact was generational. Poe Dameron took up her mantle, not only as a commander, but as someone who inspired loyalty through trust. Rey inherited her saber, and with it, Leia's belief that light can emerge from any darkness. Even Ben Solo, redeemed in the final hours of his life, carried Leia's voice as the echo that guided him home. Leia left behind no imperial legacy, no family dynasty. She left behind hope. When Rey buried Leia's saber beside Luke's beneath the twin suns of Tatooine, she laid to rest not just a weapon, but a lineage, a legacy that spanned from Anakin Skywalker's fall to Luke's faith, to Leia's fierce love, and now to something new. Leia once said, "We have everything we need," and that was her truest gift. Not just the resistance, not just her name, but the example she lived by. That strength is quiet, that kindness is brave, that leadership is service, and that no one, not one soul, is ever beyond redemption. In the end, Leia Organa became more than the galaxy's guiding light. She became its conscience, and long after her voice faded into the Force, her words, her choices, and her strength continue to ripple across the stars. She lived for peace, she fought for justice, she died with hope, and in her memory, that hope will never fade. Some weapons are forged in silence, and sharpened in every room where people refuse to listen. Before she became a general, before she became a symbol of rebellion, Leia Organa was trained for the battlefield of words. As a child of Alderaan, diplomacy was in her blood. Her adoptive father, Bail Organa, was one of the most skilled political minds in the Galactic Senate. He taught her that negotiations weren't about avoiding conflict. They were about winning wars without a single shot fired. From a young age, Leia watched him maneuver through endless sessions on Coruscant, where power often hid behind manners, and the most dangerous battles were fought over language. She learned that every pause could be a tactic, every look a signal. She absorbed it all. And by 16, she was already delivering speeches on behalf of Alderaan's humanitarian efforts. At 17, she was one of the youngest senators in the Imperial Senate. To most, she appeared a sharp but well-bred aristocrat. They didn't see the fire. That was her advantage. Leia played the part of the polished noblewoman when it suited her. She could flatter, redirect, and outmaneuver seasoned senators twice her age. But beneath the poise was a steel spine. When debating imperial policy, she would press like a blade, never raising her voice but never backing down. She knew how to stall legislation, how to bury dangerous reforms in subcommittees, how to draw attention to injustice without being caught overtly supporting rebellion. It was a dangerous game. Many of her colleagues were spies, informants for Palpatine's regime. One wrong word could mean execution. But Leia understood the risks. She wasn't speaking to the chamber. She was speaking to the galaxy. Her speeches denouncing forced labor on Outer Rim worlds circulated quietly across rebel cells. Her arguments for demilitarization and equitable trade inspired senators from neutral systems to start questioning the Empire's intentions. And when the Empire dissolved the Senate altogether, Leia did not weep. She had already moved far beyond words. In the Rebel Alliance, she continued to use diplomacy as a frontline weapon. While other leaders focused on tactics and starships, Leia traveled to independent systems, negotiated military support, recruited neutral leaders into the cause. She convinced Mon Cala to lend its fleet. She rallied Outer Rim miners into supplying materials. She brokered non-aggression pacts between rival worlds so resources could flow uninterrupted. And she did it all without threats or coercion. Leia didn't impose. She inspired. Even after the fall of the Empire in the early days of the New Republic, Leia was at the heart of every major treaty. She helped write the Galactic Concordance, the document that officially ended hostilities and outlawed Imperial military movements. She advocated for reparations, not revenge. But peace, she learned, is harder to defend than war. The new Senate grew complacent. Corruption crept back. Old families with old wealth began rewriting history. Leia stood in the center of it all, trying to hold the Republic together, not through military might, but through unity, law, and truth. And once again, she was punished for her truth. When her identity as Darth Vader's daughter became public, many in the Senate turned on her. Deals fell through, allies distanced themselves, and Leia, she gave them no satisfaction. "I am Leia Organa," she told the press. "I serve the people, not their fear." That was when she left the Senate, not in disgrace, but in defiance. The Republic had lost its voice of clarity, and Leia took her diplomacy elsewhere, to the Resistance. There, her skills remained just as valuable. Every supply line she negotiated, every safe harbor she secured, every defector she turned, was the work of a stateswoman who understood that war is not just fought with guns. Sometimes it's fought with conviction, with conversation, with courage in the council room. Leia Organa may have been a warrior, but before the blaster, before the saber, she always reached first for the blade of diplomacy, and she wielded it like no one else in the galaxy. I wasn't afraid of what I could become. I was afraid of what I might lose. Leia Organa had always felt the Force. She did not call it that at first. As a child, she experienced moments of intuition, sensing deception before it was spoken, fear before it showed in someone's eyes. She could reach into silence and find clarity. Later, she would call it instinct, then focus. Eventually, she called it the Force. The truth was always inside her. But unlike her brother, Leia's journey to the Force came later, and it came not with excitement, but with reluctance. After the fall of the Empire, as the New Republic began its fragile formation, Luke Skywalker started seeking knowledge of the old Jedi Order. He wanted to rebuild, not as a carbon copy of what had come before, but as a new path guided by understanding, humility, and balance. He turned first to his sister. She had the blood of Anakin Skywalker, the strength, the discipline, the will. Luke told her plainly, she would be a great Jedi. Leia hesitated. Her duty to the Republic was immense. Her grief over Alderaan, Han's restlessness, the child growing in her arms, all weighed heavily. But in time, she agreed. Not to become a Jedi Master, not to carry a title. She trained to understand herself. On remote worlds far from the Senate floor, Leia trained in secret. Her lightsaber was gold and silver, sleek and elegant, crafted with both precision and restraint. Luke taught her how to listen to the Force, not command it. How to fight, but also when not to. She was a natural. More than just powerful, Leia was centered. Her connection to the Force was steady, unflinching. While Luke sometimes wrestled with its vastness, Leia anchored herself in discipline. She had spent her life walking between emotion and duty, and the Force responded to that balance. She saw visions, sometimes of her mother, Padme Amidala, though she never truly saw her face, sometimes of her father, not the mask, but the man before it, and often of her son, Ben. In those visions, she saw possibilities, paths that bent in different directions depending on her choices. In one of them, she saw a saber igniting, her son's face, her own hand, his death. That was the moment she stopped. Leia did not renounce the Force. She did not reject its teachings, but she walked away from the Jedi path, not because she feared the darkness, but because she feared what she might lose if she embraced too much of the light at the wrong time. The galaxy doesn't need another Jedi, she told Luke. It needs a mother, a leader, someone who remembers what peace feels like. Luke understood. He accepted her saber and promised to keep it safe. Leia never stopped feeling the Force. She simply stopped trying to master it. Years passed. When Rey entered her life, Leia felt the Force surge again, not in herself, but in this young woman with no name, no legacy, only strength and questions. Leia didn't pick up the saber again, but she taught, she mentored, she led with intuition, grace, and vision. She became the Jedi she never had to name, and when the time came, when the Resistance needed her most, when her son stood on the edge of darkness, Leia reached through the Force one final time. Not to fight, not to destroy, but to call out. Ben, her voice was the last thing he heard before he turned. Her strength, not of saber, but of soul, was what redeemed him. And after her death, when Rey journeyed to Tatooine, she buried both Luke's and Leia's sabers in the sand beneath the twin suns. She marked their graves not as fallen warriors, but as guardians of light. Leia Organa was never crowned Jedi Master. She never sat on a Jedi council, but she carried wisdom that surpassed tradition. She taught that the Force was not only a weapon, it was a compass, and she lived its truth until her final breath. Part 3. Alderaan's daughter. Alderaan lives in me. As long as I breathe, it is not lost. Leia Organa was never born on Alderaan, but it was more than a birthplace. It was her soul. Adopted by Queen Breha and Viceroy Bail Organa, Leia was raised in the high mountain palaces of a world devoted to peace, art, diplomacy, and harmony. Alderaan did not just teach her how to govern, it taught her why people must be protected. From her earliest days, Leia was immersed in Alderaanian tradition. She studied languages, galactic law, music, and philosophy. She learned the ceremonial dances of Alderaanian royalty and the histories of her world's pacifist kings and warrior queens, those who knew war only to prevent it. She played among quiet gardens, beneath snow-capped peaks, and in the spires of the Royal Academy. She heard birdsong in the mornings and string music in the evenings. The planet was alive in every color and sound, and it was all taken in a moment. When the Death Star fired, Leia was aboard the battle station. She had just been forced to watch Grand Moff Tarkin murder her home in a show of power. The sound wasn't the loudest thing she remembered. It was the silence that followed. In the seconds after Alderaan's destruction, something inside Leia shattered. She felt a grief that had no words, no time, and no comfort. But she didn't cry. Not then. Leia never allowed herself the indulgence of collapse. She buried her grief beneath resolve and let the rage cool into purpose. She would not just mourn Alderaan, she would make its memory a weapon. In the years that followed, Leia carried her heritage with her like a flame. When she spoke in the Senate, she invoked Alderaan. When she negotiated peace or demanded aid for Outer Rim worlds, she did so as Alderaan's voice. She ensured that Alderaanian refugees, those off-world during the planet's destruction, were protected, supported, and given a future. She created memory archives, cultural preservation initiatives, and living histories to ensure that Alderaan would not fade into a cautionary tale, but remain a symbol of resistance. Even her fashion, known across the galaxy, reflected her roots. Leia's white robes, understated elegance, and long flowing designs echoed the styles of Alderaanian diplomacy. She never adorned herself in opulence. Her attire always spoke of humility, strength, and peace. Leia's connection to Alderaan was spiritual too. She often visited quiet worlds with similar landscapes, Chandrila, Naboo, even Endor, to feel wind and soil that reminded her of home. She wrote poetry in private, though few ever saw it. One poem, once shared with Han in a moment of rare vulnerability, ended simply, "Alderaan burns, but I do not. I carry its seed in my soul." Though Alderaan was lost, Leia never stopped being its daughter. She held onto its ideals even when war demanded compromise. She carried its traditions into her resistance. She trained her staff to lead with compassion first, firepower second. She valued negotiation, protected civilians, and refused to adopt the fear-driven doctrine of military empires. To the galaxy, Alderaan was gone. To Leia, it was alive in every decision she made. And when she died, her body was not returned to a homeworld. It had no grave of soil or stone. But it didn't need one, because Alderaan's greatest legacy was not its land. It was Leia Organa, and through her, Alderaan survived. I never knew them, but I still remember. Leia Organa was born in the final hour of the Old Republic, one of two twins born to a queen turned senator and a Jedi turned darkness. She never met her mother, Padme Amidala. She never heard her father's voice, Anakin Skywalker, and yet, through the Force, she felt them. At first, it came as dreams, gentle, blurred sensations, a warm hand, a lullaby she'd never heard but somehow knew, a sorrow too deep for childhood. Leia, even before she understood the Force, carried a grief that didn't begin with her. It began with Padme. Though Leia was raised on Alderaan, taught by Queen Breha to value logic, diplomacy, and poise, she always felt a fire inside her that didn't quite match the serenity of her homeworld. She chalked it up to frustration, passion, ambition. But later, Luke told her what he had seen. She was brave, he said, strong, fierce. She loved without compromise, and she died of a broken heart. Leia barely spoke when she first heard her mother's name. She didn't cry. She listened. She learned of Padme's work as a senator of Naboo, her commitment to the Republic, her speeches in defense of peace, her belief that democracy must never be taken for granted. She learned of the way Padme stood firm against tyranny, even as it rose within her own government. And in every detail, Leia saw herself. It was as if her life had followed the shape of a woman she had never known, but whose spirit lived within her. The Force connected them across time. Leia would later meditate and catch glimpses, never clear, never full, of her mother standing on a balcony, hand on her stomach, tears in her eyes, a woman torn between love and fear, a woman who had hoped even when the galaxy crumbled. Those fragments were enough. They weren't facts. They were feelings. And Leia trusted them. But if Padme gave Leia her fire, Anakin gave her something else. Darkness. Leia feared her father's legacy in a way Luke never did. She wasn't raised as a Jedi. She hadn't seen Anakin's goodness firsthand. She had only known Darth Vader, the mask, the destroyer of worlds, the torturer of friends, the killer of hope. And then she learned that he was once her father. She raged, not outwardly, but inwardly. Quiet, private fury, not at Luke for telling her, not even at Vader, at herself for wondering if any part of that darkness could live inside her. And yet, through the Force, she eventually came to see a deeper truth. Her father was more than Vader. He was Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi who fought for others, who loved Padme, who died to save Luke, who, in the end, chose light. Leia never spoke to Anakin's ghost, not the way Luke did. She did not seek him out, but she felt him, especially after Ben was born. There were moments holding her child when she could sense that same fear, the terror of losing those you love, the temptation to protect through control. Leia fought that feeling every day. And she forgave Anakin, not for what he became, but for what he lost. She understood, because she had almost lost her son too. Through Padme, she found courage. Through Anakin, she found warning. But she also found a promise, that blood does not define you, only choice does. And Leia Organa chose, again and again, to become something better than her legacy, while never denying it. She didn't erase their names, she carried them like echoes, soft, haunting, and sacred. Padme's passion, Anakin's power, her own clarity. 3 generations bound not by fate, but by love. I carry my sorrow the way I carry my title, with purpose. Few in the galaxy experienced as much loss as Leia Organa, and none endured it with such grace. Her life was marked by the relentless rhythm of hope gained and hope torn away. Yet through every heartbreak, she did not retreat. She did not collapse. She led. The first and greatest loss came on Alderaan. She had grown up on its mountain spires, had sung its folk songs, had tasted its sweet spring wine, had walked its glass gardens with the people she called family. When the Death Star destroyed the planet, it did more than end a world. It erased a culture, a people, a piece of Leia's soul. She witnessed it from afar. She couldn't stop it. She couldn't look away. The next day, she stood with the rebellion as if nothing had changed. Because if she let grief consume her, the Empire would win again. That was the beginning of a pattern. Leia lost comrades daily, pilots, soldiers, friends. Some fell in battle, others in betrayal. She rarely had time to mourn. Grief became a silent companion, folded neatly behind her words in briefings, behind the smile she gave to frightened recruits. She lost her father, Bail Organa. She lost her mother, Breha. She lost her biological parents before she ever met them. But the pain that cut deepest came much later. She lost Han to distance, then to death. She lost Ben to the dark side. She lost Luke to the Force when he sacrificed himself to save the Resistance. Each loss fractured her, but none destroyed her, because Leia had learned a truth that most Jedi never fully embraced. Grief is not the opposite of strength. It is the proof of love, and love is the greatest strength of all. She never allowed sorrow to harden her. She never became bitter. Where others broke, she bent. Where others hid, she stood visible. She listened to young soldiers afraid to die. She comforted parents who had lost their children in battle. She sat with droids who had lost their owners. Leia made time for the grieving, even when no one made time for her. Because she understood, morale is not built with rousing speeches. It is built with compassion. And even when she was utterly alone, after Han was killed by their son, after Luke vanished into the Force, after Ben descended into Kylo Ren, Leia kept walking forward. "He's still in there," she whispered once. "And if I give up on him, then who will believe in anyone?" She never gave up. Not on people. Not on peace. Not on herself. She carried the pain quietly, wore it like armor, not because she refused to feel it, but because she knew how heavy others' burdens were, and she refused to add to them. In doing so, she became more than a leader. She became a symbol of survival. To every refugee, every resistance recruit, every pilot in a burning cockpit, Leia represented something more than victory. She represented endurance. And in her final act, reaching out through the Force to call her son back, she gave not a command but a memory. The memory of a mother who never stopped believing, even when the galaxy had. Her light did not burn with rage or vengeance. It glowed softly and steadily like a beacon through the storm. Part 6, Women of the Rebellion. The fight isn't won until every voice is heard. Leia Organa stood on battlefields and in Senate chambers, but her most lasting victories may have come in the hearts of those who followed her, especially the women who saw her not just as a leader, but as proof that they belonged in the fight. From the earliest days of the Rebel Alliance, Leia defied every assumption of what a princess was supposed to be. She didn't hide behind guards. She didn't wait for rescue. She gave the orders, led the charge, and dared anyone to question her right to do so. But Leia didn't only break barriers. She opened doors. In a galaxy that often relegated women to roles of silence or spectacle, Leia created space for others to rise beside her. She saw strength in all forms, in warriors and diplomats, in pilots and medics, in spies and engineers. She surrounded herself with women who shared her drive. Mon Mothma, the founder of the alliance, became both a political ally and a mirror to Leia's own commitment to governance without tyranny. Shara Bey, ace pilot and mother to Poe Dameron, flew missions for Leia in the darkest hours of the rebellion. Amelin Holdo, eccentric and brilliant, led with grace and sacrifice, never flinching in the face of impossible odds. Paige and Rose Tico, sisters from humble origins, proved that courage wasn't reserved for generals. It lived in maintenance bays and bomber crews too. Leia treated each woman not as an exception, but as essential. She promoted on merit. She listened without condescension. She demanded excellence, not perfection, and offered guidance without ego. And when mistakes were made, Leia never shamed. She taught. In the New Republic, she championed gender equity through policy, ensuring leadership training and representation across sectors. She instituted mentorship programs in planetary defense forces. She authored anti-discrimination clauses in Republic military charters. And in the Resistance, her command staff was one of the most diverse in the galaxy, not by accident, but by intent. Leia believed deeply in the idea that strength should never be gatekept. When Rey arrived, confused, powerful, untrained, Leia didn't hesitate. She took the young woman in without question, not as a curiosity or symbol, but as a person. She offered Rey what few in the galaxy ever had: trust, and more than that, a future. Leia didn't lecture her on Jedi rules. She didn't burden her with legacy. She simply helped her become who she already was meant to be. To Leia, leadership wasn't about dominance. It was about uplifting others, especially those the galaxy often overlooked. "You don't have to be loud to be powerful," she once said. "You don't have to be perfect to be brave." Leia Organa showed that womanhood and leadership were not opposing forces. They were a fusion of empathy, vision, and unwavering resolve. And that message echoed. Long after her death, women continued to rise, inspired by the path Leia had blazed. Rey, now the last Jedi, carried forward Leia's lightsaber. Rose Tico remained a voice of truth and heart. Countless others across the stars, pilots, chancellors, engineers, cited Leia as their reason for standing tall. Not because she claimed power, but because she shared it. Leia Organa wasn't just a leader of the rebellion. She was the heartbeat of a movement that made space for everyone to lead. Wars are not won with armies alone. They are won with the right voices in the right rooms. While many knew Leia Organa as a battlefield commander, her most profound victories often took place far from war rooms and blaster fire. Her greatest weapon was not always her lightsaber or her command voice. It was alliance. Leia understood that an army could only fight with ships and troops, but a movement fought with ideas, trust, and unity. From the earliest days of the Rebel Alliance, Leia served as a linchpin between its fractured factions. Unlike many rebels, she was raised in diplomacy, trained to negotiate among those who hated one another more than they hated the Empire. Bail Organa had taught her how to read silences, how to turn insult into leverage, and how to close deals without ever raising her voice. She did not just speak with senators. She spoke with smugglers, warlords, planetary monarchs, and underground operatives. In every conversation, she listened first. And then she forged the path forward. It was Leia who helped secure the cooperation of Mon Cala, convincing King Lichar and his people to lend their fleets to the rebellion. It was Leia who worked with rogue factions in the Outer Rim, groups once seen as too unruly or dangerous, to bring them into a unified cause. It was Leia who helped transform the rebellion from a desperate collection of freedom fighters into a government in waiting. After the Empire's fall, she turned her attention to the fragile New Republic, advocating for decentralized power and demilitarization. She believed deeply that centralizing authority had been the mistake that gave rise to Palpatine's empire, and she was determined not to let history repeat. But even then, not all battles were won. Leia often found herself outvoted or stonewalled by senators more interested in wealth and image than justice. She watched with quiet frustration as her colleagues ignored the warning signs of the First Order's rise. When her parentage was revealed, Vader's daughter, it gave political enemies the excuse they'd long sought. She left the Senate, but she never stopped building alliances. From the shadows, Leia began her most masterful political campaign yet, the Resistance. This time, she did not rely on the Senate. She turned to old friends, Smugglers who owed her favors, former generals who trusted her judgment, entire worlds that remembered Alderaan and would not let Leia fight alone. She built a secret web of support, supplies from Chandrila, fuel from Pantora, safe harbors from allies across the Mid and Outer Rim. She called in old debts, inspired new loyalties, and fostered a culture of mutual belief. Leia understood the power of personal diplomacy. She didn't just ask for help, she explained why it mattered. She let people feel seen, heard, needed. Even as the resistance shrank, her network grew tighter. And when it mattered most, when the final war against the Final Order began, those long-nurtured ties held the line. In the last hours before the Battle of Exegol, Leia's unseen work became visible. Fleets arrived not from orders, but from loyalty, from memory, from the promise of a better future she had spent her life stitching together. She didn't just fight evil, one admiral later said. She united those who'd forgotten how to stand together. Leia's alliances were not based on politics alone. They were built on trust, earned, never demanded. She knew that unity, not firepower, would be the true key to peace. Because Leia Organa believed one truth above all: no one wins a war alone. Part 3: Secrets and Shadows. The truth isn't always a shout in the Senate. Sometimes it's a whisper behind enemy lines. While Leia Organa stood as a public icon, princess, senator, general, much of her effectiveness came from what no one ever saw. She understood something many generals forgot. Wars are won not just with weapons, but with information. Leia learned the value of intelligence early. Growing up on Alderaan, she often overheard her adoptive father, Bail Organa, discussing rebel movements in hushed tones. Bail was more than a senator. He was a quiet architect of the early rebellion. From him, Leia learned that truth could be dangerous and also critical. As a senator, she used her diplomatic missions to quietly pass coded messages, transfer data, and meet with rebel sympathizers under the guise of royal diplomacy. When Imperial agents looked at her, they saw a youthful noble playing politics. They never saw the spy. Even after Alderaan's destruction, Leia maintained contacts across the galaxy. Former students, local governors, cargo pilots, slicers, and merchants. She developed an unofficial spy network, codenamed the Web, that passed intelligence to the rebellion using obscure trade routes, ancient encryption protocols, and verbal code phrases hidden in routine transmissions. Leia didn't just rely on droids or military officers. She trusted people. She cultivated loyalty through respect, not fear. And in return, they gave her what she needed most: eyes where she couldn't be, ears in rooms she'd never enter. It was her spies who first learned of Operation Cinder, the Empire's devastating contingency plan following the Emperor's death. Leia acted swiftly, evacuating key civilian populations and rallying resistance before entire worlds could be turned to ash. Later, during the fragile peace of the New Republic, Leia watched with growing dread as the First Order began its quiet expansion. The Senate dismissed her warnings, calling her paranoid. So she turned again to the shadows. She reactivated old networks, trained new agents, even reconnected with intelligence veterans from the rebellion, people like Amelin Holdo, whose eccentric public persona often concealed brilliant undercover work. Leia learned to embed operatives in shipping guilds, mining colonies, and even enemy outposts. One of her most effective tools was C-3PO, not just a protocol droid, but a mobile data gatherer able to process and carry massive volumes of encrypted intel without raising suspicion. Few realized how vital the Golden Droid was to Resistance communications. Leia also oversaw the creation of safe houses across the galaxy, abandoned moisture farms on Jakku, asteroid mining posts, even forgotten rebel bunkers from the Clone Wars era. These locations were more than hideouts. They were communication hubs, intelligence caches, and lifelines for her scattered operatives. Unlike many Resistance leaders, Leia was not afraid to work dirty when necessary, but she never lost her moral compass. She rejected torture. She forbade sabotage that risked civilian lives. She held her agents to a higher standard, even when the odds were overwhelming. That discipline paid off. When the First Order destroyed the Hosnian system, most of the galaxy's intelligence infrastructure collapsed. But Leia's networks remained intact, smaller, quieter, but alive. They became the Resistance's last line of knowledge. Through those quiet operatives, the resistance knew when to flee, when to strike, and who to trust. When the time came to locate Exegol, the secret Sith stronghold, Leia's groundwork gave the final push. The war in the stars was loud, but the war in the shadows was just as vital. And Leia had won it, time and again, with calm, vision, and trust. She knew everyone, a resistance agent later said. Not just by name, she knew who they were. That's what made you want to fight for her. Leia Organa didn't wear a spy's hood, but in silence, she protected the galaxy with truths no one else saw coming.